Well, thanks, Dallas. Thanks for hosting us here today, and thanks for purchasing multiple copies of The Moneymen and providing it to everybody. Sure we'll see a blip in sales as a result. Thanks, of course, to the McKell Institute for the invitation to speak here this morning. I think of the McKell Institute as an ideal forum to talk about the future, for two reasons. Firstly, William McKell's legacy needs to be remembered and honoured. He was a pioneer of a modern, reforming Labor approach to government. Reformist and pragmatic, idealistic and realistic. McKell's legacy in government was substantial. He knew that Labor was at its best when representing and governing for all Australians, for those in the regions, the bush, the suburbs and the cities, for trade unionists and small business person alike. And secondly, because the McKell Institute's shown a willingness and an ability to lead important debates. And leading debates is important for those of us from the progressive side of politics. And it's the economic policy of an incoming Shorten Labor government that I want to talk about this morning. The fact is that as things currently stand, a Shorten Labor government would inherit an economy with sluggish growth, unemployment higher than at any time during the global financial crisis, higher than the United States, United Kingdom, Germany and New Zealand. We would inherit an economy with youth unemployment that could be carefully, soberly described as a crisis. And while we continue to enjoy 24 years of uninterrupted economic growth, the fact is that our growth is now more anaemic, more narrowly based than for most of that 24 years. Australia's growth rate averaged 3.5% between 1992 and 2008. It reached 5% in 1999. And now we have growth running at 2% a year, not enough to see unemployment coming down. And yet we're told we should celebrate this because we're doing better than Brazil. We've experienced 5 consecutive quarters of declining living standards. Barring the GFC, this is the only time this has happened since records began. We all talk about the transition from the mining construction boom, but the fact of the matter is the transition could be going so much better. The next government will have to have spurring growth, competitiveness and productivity as its uppermost priorities. Last week, Malcolm Turnbull said the Liberal Party wasn't providing the economic leadership required. We've been saying that for 2 years, and the majority of the Liberal Party agreed with Mr Turnbull. We have had 2 years of wasted economic non-leadership when we could least afford it. The Liberals had a plan to win office, but not a plan for office, not a mistake we intend to make. It's not the government I wish to focus on this morning, it's the alternative government. We've spent the last 2 years not only thinking about how to win the next election, but what sort of economic leadership we need to provide in office. Underpinning everything is our commitment to growth and to opportunity. Labor will always be the party of economic growth. Economic growth is the best poverty alleviation program going. It turns aspiration into reality. But of course we also need to be focused on creating opportunity. Opportunity for all. Opportunity for every Australian to grow to their absolute maximum potential, to live their lives to their fullest and best. The main task of a Labor Treasurer is to ensure a growing economy, creating good jobs and improved living standards for all Australians. A modern, fair, innovative economy which creates new opportunities open for all to pursue. Today I want to outline 5 principles which will underpin the economic management approach of a Shorten Labor government. It's right that an opposition should outline the approach we'll take to responding to economic developments which emerged during our term, Harold Macmillan's famous events. Firstly, Labor in office will have a focus on creating the conditions for new firms to emerge. In many cases they'll fail, in some cases they'll survive, in some cases they'll prosper. But creating the conditions for entrepreneurs to take great ideas and turn them into thriving businesses will be vital to our economic future. The case for doing this is overwhelming. I want to emphasise that this will be a hallmark of our approach in office. I know innovation's been the flavour of the fortnight, but this has been a focus of our thinking and policy development for the last 2 years. I first flagged an emphasis on policies to promote entrepreneurialism and disruption in my 2014 National Press Club budget in reply. Bill Shorten made innovation and preparing for the jobs of the future the hallmark of his 2015 budget reply speech in the House of Representatives. The case for doing this is simple and strong. The majority of jobs to be created in Australia over the next decade are in firms which do not today exist. Put simply, a large part of our success or failure economically over the next decade will come down to these questions. Have we created the environment in which new ideas can be turned into new companies? Have we facilitated an environment for new firms to emerge, in many cases fail, but in other cases to grow and to employ? Are we producing young people from our education system with the skills to compete in this rapidly changing era of technological change? Labor's the party of jobs. A party concerned about job creation will be a government concerned about firm creation and giving young people the skills they need to win and, importantly, to create the jobs of the future. I mentioned before the majority of jobs to be created in the next decade are in firms which do not today even exist. It's also the case that automation will replace close to half of all low knowledge intensity jobs over the next 20 years. We must be giving our young people a shot at the high knowledge intensity jobs that will be created and will incidentally be higher paying jobs as well. The rise of automation is one of the factors driving the rising inequality around the world, with the labour market being increasingly bifurcated between highly paid, well-skilled jobs and others, and the middle of the labour market is being hollowed out. We need to be arming our economy and individuals with the tools they need to compete in this rapidly changing world. We need to unleash an age of entrepreneurialism. As I mentioned, a focus on science and technology and engineering and maths was the focus of Bill Shorten's reply to the last budget. Vital for ensuring that the graduates of our education system have the skills to compete in this rapidly changing world, but also so they have the skills to develop and realise new ideas which will spur the creation of new firms that will disrupt the business models of existing firms here and elsewhere. We've had plenty to say about innovation policy. In Bill's budget reply, he announced we'd boost the skills of 25,000 current primary and secondary teachers, train 25,000 new teachers who are science and technology graduates, right off the HECSTED of 100,000 science, technology, engineering and maths students, and encourage more women to study and teach in these fields. And just yesterday, following our important commitment earlier in the week to bring down higher education costs for students around the country, we announced other important initiatives which will help drive a new generation of innovators, risk-takers and wealth creators, including creating a start-up year at universities so students can develop innovative ideas, developing a national digital workforce plan, the creation of 2 new visa classes to attract the best global entrepreneurial talent, and creating a new innovation investment partnership between superannuation funds, start-ups and venture capital funds. And the only new advisory committee that I will establish as Treasurer will be a Treasurer's Entrepreneurs Council. Many sectors of the economy get good access to the Treasurer, but entrepreneurs do not get enough. It will meet regularly with me and Treasury officials and relevant ministers. It will be a vital clearinghouse for policy ideas to be run past the people creating the jobs and growth, our entrepreneurs. And we will have more to say about this as well. This is not a passing fad of opposition, but a focus which will define our approach in government. It will be the focus of Bill as Prime Minister, mine as Treasurer and our entire team. It will be one of the defining elements of our approach to economic policy making. Secondly, today I want to say something about Labor's approach to business more broadly. We want the Labor government to have a broad and open engagement with business. I mentioned before that Labor is a party of economic growth. Governments facilitate growth. Businesses invest to create growth. And governments and business need to work closely together to drive stronger growth. Since becoming Shadow Treasurer, I've made better and closer relationships with business a personal priority. I've spent lots of time with businesses, big and small, talking through issues important with them without media or hoopla. I've wanted to better understand the challenges of particular businesses and for them to better understand what drives me as the alternative Treasurer. This doesn't mean we'll always agree. We have different jobs to do. Businesses have a bottom line and the nation has lots of bottom lines. They need to make difficult decisions to improve opportunity, fairness, environmental sustainability, along with economic growth and maintaining robust finances. But whilst we don't always have to agree, business and the government must always have close engagement. We'll be sharing our thoughts on the emerging challenges and opportunities and have an easy and open line of communication between business and the Labor government. Which brings me to the third principle of economic management of a shortened Labor government, a willingness to work closely with business and the community groups and unions on the imperative need to improve productivity and competitiveness on a sector-by-sector basis. The most important thing the government can do is ensure macroeconomic settings are correct and we have low inflation, low unemployment environment. But we have to accept that in these times of low interest rates and budget deficits, there's only so much that fiscal and monetary policy can be called on to do to spur economic growth. I make no apologies for wanting to be a treasurer in a government which examines competitiveness on a sector-by-sector basis, prioritising those sectors which show the most potential for economic growth and improved productivity. This is not some old-fashioned left-wing interventionist picking winners agenda. On the contrary, only a dogmatic right-wing approach would see potential growth go begging because of an ideological refusal to examine competitiveness and productivity on a sector-by-sector basis. This is more about looking at how we build on Australia's comparative advantages and our national endowments that have been built up over many generations. Let's take financial services, for example. When I was Minister for Financial Services, I was struck by the fact that our well-developed financial sector is first class in so many ways, yet underdone in export performance. For example, less than 5% of the funds under management in Australia are for overseas clients. This compares with 80% in Singapore, 65% in Hong Kong and 40% in the United Kingdom. So it commissioned Mark Johnson, the former Deputy Chair of the Macquarie Bank, to review the sector's performance and make recommendations for the promotion of Australia as a financial services hub. He delivered a good report, which has been implemented by us and our successors. Just last week, Japan signed up to the Asian Funds Management Passport, which was one of the key recommendations of the Johnson Review. This approach can and will be replicated elsewhere. People often ask me, where will the growth come from after the mining boom? Well, it's not the job of Canberra to determine that, but it is our job to identify potential areas of growth and ensure everything possible is done to ensure competitiveness in those areas. Deloitte, McKinsey and the Business Council have all pointed out the benefits of this approach. Deloitte's identified areas like tourism, agribusiness, gas and international education as needing this type of care and attention. Similarly, McKinsey has identified mining, agriculture, education, tourism, food manufacturing and advanced manufacturing as needing a sectoral approach. Renewable energy is another obvious area of huge growth potential, which can be impacted negatively or positively by government policy. I agree with the BCA, which has argued that the government should use, and I quote, specific sector strategies to develop and take forward a structural reform agenda that lifts the competitiveness of Australian industries. When it comes to sector-specific strategies, I can think of few more urgent and pressing for prioritisation than advanced manufacturing. We can continue to be a nation that makes things. We'll make them differently, we'll make them smarter, but make them we must. Accordingly, advanced manufacturing will be prioritised for our sector-by-sector approach to competitiveness. This is the approach Labor will take in office. We can't afford to let important sectors of the economy stagnate that have the potential for productivity and export growth. This brings me to the fourth principle of Labor's economic approach, engagement with our region for outcomes which are mutually beneficial. Let me be very clear. Better and deeper economic engagement with Asia is an important part of Labor's legacy. It's an even more important part of our future. I'm very conscious, as Labor's alternative treasurer, that there's an important legacy to nurture and to build upon. Gough Whitlam's early, prescient recognition of the People's Republic of China, Bob Hawke's leadership in the region, promotion of APEC as an important multilateral forum, Paul Keating's promotion of Australia's relationship with Asia as being one of the most important initiatives of his Prime Ministership, the transformation of APEC into a leaders' forum, which Paul Keating single-handedly drove against the odds, was just one part of his promotion of greater engagement with Asia. He visited Indonesia more times in his 4 years as Prime Minister than all of his prime ministerial predecessors combined. Of course, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard recognised the importance of the Asian century. Julia Gillard drove the Australia in the Asian Century White Paper, and not for nothing has Kevin Rudd been chosen for the important position of Chairman of the Asia Society based in New York. On a similar note to Paul Keating, I note that Wayne Swan undertook more trips to China in his 6 years as Treasurer than all his predecessors' treasurers since Federation combined. As Shadow Treasurer, I've undertaken 3 official visits overseas, 2 to China, 1 to India. In a few weeks, I'm returning to India, and I'll also be visiting Southeast Asia later in the year. I suppose this reflects my international engagement priorities and underpins the approach I would apply as Treasurer. I don't think I need to spend too long explaining why. We are part of the fastest growing region in the world. We have to make every post a winner. Within this framework, let me just briefly mention a couple of points of detail. Firstly, the importance of multilateralism within Asia. We very much welcome the creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. While the current government was slow to sign on, Bill Shorten, Tanya Plibersek and I were of one mind from the outset. Australia should join, and the sooner the better. It'll be an important institution. Another important institution is APEC. Let's be frank. It's become fashionable in recent years to be dismissive of APEC, to reject it as irrelevant. It is the case that newer and vitally important multilateral institutions have been sucking up the bandwidth of attention. This strikes me as a reason to pay more attention to APEC, not less, to invest more time and energy in making sure we're getting as much out of APEC as we possibly can. Of course, the APEC agenda is set by the Chair of the day, but considering that APEC was primarily an Australian initiative, there's a special obligation on an Australian Treasurer to be deeply engaged with the APEC agenda. As Treasurer, I'd be particularly focused on keeping APEC focused on better and further liberalisation of financial markets to better facilitate the export of Australian financial services. And secondly, the importance of deeper engagement with the countries of Southeast Asia. I think across the country the economic opportunities of China and India are by and large well understood, but we need much better engagement with Indonesia and the other countries of Southeast Asia. We are simply not doing enough. The demographics suit Indonesia, with a growing labour force, where many other countries face the opposite. Indonesia is currently the world's 9th largest economy, but it will soon overtake Germany, France and Russia. They are on track in Indonesia to become the world's 5th largest economy by 2030. McKinsey has predicted that by 2030 Indonesia will have added 90 million people to its consuming middle class, more than any other country over that period except for China and India. There are enormous opportunities for Australia in this growth, but it must be seen as part of a broader context. It's a truism that we need an economic relationship between Australia and Indonesia, which is part of a broader, less transactional and deeper engagement between our countries. Getting this right is one of the key challenges and opportunities Australia faces over the next decade. Let me put it to you another way. Can you think of two countries anywhere on the planet that are so close geographically and yet from such divergent cultural backgrounds? This makes the importance of nurturing our relationships so much greater. It will need to be a holistic effort. We need to be better at showing our engagement through the speaking of Bahasa Indonesian. It's a travesty that more people studied Bahasa in Australian universities in 1970 than do today. There were plenty of good ideas in the Australia in the Asian Century White Paper. These were good ideas for better engagement between our education systems, which should be not archived but embraced on a bipartisan basis. My colleagues Tim Watts and Claire O'Neill floated the interesting concept of a Pan-Asian university in their recent excellent book, Two Futures. All of these and many more will inform Labor's approach in office. One, as a keen student of Indonesian culture and history, I will be engaged in thoroughly as Treasurer. From an economic point of view, we need much more engagement between policymakers. There's currently, for example, an annual dialogue between the Australian Treasurer and Trade Minister and their Chinese counterparts. On coming to office, Penny Wong and I would quickly make the suggestion of a similar dialogue to our Indonesian counterparts as the opening suggestion as to how we could best discuss much deeper opening up of our markets and engagement on matters of mutual benefit. Now finally today I want to deal with the fifth principle of Labor's economic management, dealing with fiscal policy. As I said, the first task of a federal Labor government is to engender growth. Economic growth, jobs growth. A surplus does not always reflect a strong economy. A surplus is a means to an end, not an end in itself. But a gradual, well-considered pathway back to budget balance is an important part of economic policy. I've previously outlined Labor's fiscal rule of more savings than spending over the decade to help return the budget to balance. We've already announced measures like curbing the unsustainable and unfair high-income superannuation tax concessions and our well-calibrated multinational tax policy. And our work on other budget-positive measures is well advanced, and they'll be announced in coming weeks and months. But today I want to say a little bit more about the why. Why I see a gradual and well-thought-out return to budget balance as important. Well, firstly, I'm a Keynesian. I would take a Keynesian approach to fiscal management. That means stepping in when appropriate in the absence of the market providing the circumstances to see unemployment appropriately low. But that means having a buffer to do so. I want the Treasurer of the day to have the resources and the ability to stimulate from time to time when circumstances warrant it. The world economy is more volatile and challenged than it has been for most of the last 30 years. We can't rule out the need for a government to stimulate domestic demand at some point over the next decade. Believing that to be the case, the sensible thing to do is to move towards a structural budget balance so that the Treasurer of the day has the flexibility. Keynesianism also requires conservatism. Secondly, confidence is king. Knowing that there are sensible plans in place for a return to budget balance over time gives both consumers and businesses the confidence necessary to spend and invest to engender growth. And thirdly, I believe passionately that there are still great social challenges in Australia. We need activism and investment to see an expansion of opportunity to allow every Australian to grow to their maximum potential. Paying down debt and reducing our national interest bill increases the capacity for a Labor government to make those sorts of vital investments. There's nothing right-wing about a prudent fiscal approach. Australia's first post-war budget surplus was delivered by Paul Keating in 1987. The Menzies, Holt, Gorton, McMahon and Fraser governments did not manage one budget surplus between them, not a single one. Paul Keating delivered 3. A commitment to social justice must and can partner with a fiscally rigorous, prudent approach. New spending commitments are not the only way to improve social outcomes, and often they're not even the best way. Institutional reforms, incentives and rigorous insistence on high standards are often better and, at the very least, must accompany spending decisions. Put simply, big ideas do not always mean big spending. A prudent and rigorous approach requires progressive parties to prioritise our goals and to be very clear with ourselves and the public as to what our objectives are and our priorities are. This is no bad thing, forcing a clarity of process and thinking. I've spent some time today explaining the rationale for our approach because I think it helps the Australian people understand why we're serious about good and prudent fiscal management, because the Australian people deserve to know what drives my and our approach to the budget. So today I've outlined 5 key principles that will underpin Labor's economic management in office. Creating the economic conditions for businesses to emerge, open engagement with business, governments and business working together to drive competitiveness and engagement with our region. Of course, we'll have to respond to unpredictable events and the ebbs and flows of a volatile world economy. But importantly, we'll need a well-thought-out and well-developed framework which underpins our responses to these events, as well as driving our positive economic agenda. I want to be an activist, reforming Treasurer, a senior member of a government in the reforming tradition of Labor, ensuring not only that our 24 years of uninterrupted economic growth continue, but they engender more robust growth than we are seeing now, that we're better prepared for the massive technological change underway, producing young people who can not only compete for jobs that are being created, but start the new firms which will create those jobs. A modern, fair, smart economy, embracing the future and building on our strengths. This will be a task and an opportunity that Labor will relish in office. Australia needs much better economic leadership than we've received over the last 2 years. We look forward to the contest of the next election, and more importantly, we look forward to being able to provide that economic leadership from government. Thank you very much.